Welcome to Nineworks TV. Beside me, we've got a genuine modern classic legend in the form of a 911 Turbo. This one with a difference. Today's video then we're finding out what is a 997 Turbo Gen 1.5. All right then, so I want to start off by saying that 2024 marks half a century of the 911 Turbo. And over the next 12 months here at Nineworks TV, we're going to be featuring some cool and super rare 911s, all of the turbo genre, okay? And I think this one beside me here is a really nice one to kick off. The 997 Turbo is perennially popular. It's got so much going for it. It delivers genuine supercar performance, fantastic value for money if you think where these are now being comparable to a Carrera derivative from the 991 generation, alongside iconic looks, plenty of road presence and first-class engineering. Let's dive into those points in a little bit more detail. Performance of this thing, it's knocking on the door of 500 horsepower and will tackle 0 to 62 in less than 4 seconds. Incredible stats, bearing in mind that the 997 Turbo is approaching 20 years old now. One last thing to touch on with the 997 is size. The Turbo, like any Turbo really, does this really clever trick of no matter how old these things are, they still command so much presence on the road. That is absolutely the case with the 997, and yet in terms of footprint, if you pop this next to one of the ever-expanding 911s from the modern lineup, i.e. a 992, this thing actually looks quite dainty by comparison. So, I mean, look, this really has got a lot going for it. It ticks a lot of boxes. This brings me on to this particular car and why it's special here at Lakeside Classics, is this is a Gen 1.5 Turbo. What the Gen 1.5 does is it melds the best of both worlds together from the Gen 1 and Gen 2 997 Turbo. What I mean by that is the car retains that iconic Metzger engined Le Mans race pedigree flat six in the back with 480 horsepower. Meanwhile, inside the car, there's just a slight update of a couple of bits which made it at the time perhaps a little bit more relevant for the modern world. In terms of Gen 1 worldwide sales, there were 15,500 coupes made. It's a hell of a lot, okay? In terms of the Gen 1.5, they were only made at the very end of 2008, going into 2009. That switchover between the Gen 1 and Gen 2 997 Turbos, as I said. Now, specific numbers on these are sketchy, so I'm having to rely on what's already out there. I don't usually like doing that. I like to find out the numbers for myself and give you a reliable source. Pretty unable to do that with these, but there are around 240 Gen 1.5 997 Turbos in the UK. Of those, 50 were manual or are manual, okay? You could have coupe or cab, manual or Tiptronic. Around 50 of them are manual of the 240. So it's rare, but there's more as to why this Gen 1.5 enjoys its special status. Okay, now under here is the big reason the Gen 1.5 is so revered and sought after. The beating heart of this 911 Turbo is the halo iconic Metzger engine. It's colloquially called the Metzger engine. It's named after the Porsche engineer that designed it, the late, great Hans Metzger. Various versions of this engine have featured in Porsche 911s for decades. Really, it's highly over-engineered, and that's part of the charm of the engine. Crucially, and this is what this engine has that the flat six in its successor didn't, was Le Mans winning pedigree. A version of this flat six powering the GT198 to outright success at Le Sarthe back in 1998. Versions of this engine have also found their way into the back of iconic Porsche sports cars of past, including the 959, for example. So it's got genuine historical significance and genuine top-level motorsport Le Mans winning pedigree. The other reason it's so revered and admired by enthusiasts is the reliability. They just don't go wrong. So the ownership experience of these is incredibly pleasing. One final engineering evolution that this Metzger engine featured and debuted on the 997 Gen 1 turbo was VTG, variable turbine geometry. I've explained previously what that does. It basically gives you the best of both worlds in lots of power and boost, but relatively little lag at differing speeds. So then, lots of really cool facts to remember here. The Metzger engine with variable turbine geometry, it's the final engineering evolution of this engine. And here is the really crucial bit and why the Gen 1.5 turbo is so sought after among enthusiasts. This is the last 911 turbo to feature it. Awesome stuff. Let's pop the deck lid down, take a look inside the 997 Gen 1.5 turbo and find out what else is new on this quirky crossover model. Okay, so inside the Gen 1.5, this is where the updates, where the car has taken from the Gen 2, become apparent. First things first, the key I'm holding, I've actually got both of them here, key 1 and key 2. But this is an updated key, which as you can see, is recognisable from the later Gen 2 cars. So the Gen 2 key essentially debuted on the Gen 1.5 turbo. Then ahead of me, the updates taken from the incoming Gen 2 can be seen with this centre console, chiefly the PCM system, okay? I can pop the key in so that the screen pops up. This is, I'll just turn the radio off so you don't get in trouble with copyright people. This is PCM3. Now PCM3 really was introduced for the 997 Gen 2 generation, but as I said, it kind of appeared very first of all on this Gen 1.5. It has numerous updates which probably meant more then than it does now. PCM3 by this day and age is quite old anyway. However, the appearance has changed as well, and I think looks a lot more sleeker than the Gen 1 version. It's the fascia is now black rather than that kind of like gunmetal-y colour. The surface or finish of which was really prone to cracking. This seems to have lasted a lot better. It looks nicer, and then the buttons and rotary dials as well. These are all recognisable as Gen 2 stuff. So just that general architecture, I think, is really nice. The aircon system as well is updated over the Gen 1. I mean, that's kind of it. Otherwise, we've got this lovely Gen 1 interior. Everything is just nice. Obviously, with this being a turbo as well, it's like full leather as standard. So it's a really nice place to be. This particular car is low mileage, just 21k on the clock. That is it. Okay then, let's get that shutter up. Let's go for a spin and take a look at a few more points of interest on the Gen 1.5 in a little more detail. Nice. Sounds good. Sounds Metzger, crucially. Let's go. Henry and Danny letting us out. Thank you. Right then. Out into the wild in the 997 Gen 1.5. I said to Henry 2 minutes ago that on my way up to Lakeside today, I knew I was in for trouble because I knew I'd be driving this car. I saw it on the Nineworks Marketplace and put a call into Henry and asked if I could come and drive it. And I'm really fond of these cars anyway. I'm fond of loads of 911s, aren't I? It's a real weak point for me. But yes, I love the turbo 997 turbo. I just think it is the most exquisite daily driver. And I've driven plenty of them over the years, loved every one of them, so I knew what I was in for today, and I knew I'd come away lusting after one all over again, and I can just feel it happening, and oh dear, I'm a sucker for it, aren't I? The reason I like the 997 turbo is pretty much the same as everybody else. So much performance wrapped up in this little thing, and I can say little thing now. On the road, as I touched on earlier in the video, just such commanding presence this thing has, completely belies its near 20 years of age. That really small footprint that it has compared to a 992, I think makes it really fun and usable on our roads. Again, with so much performance tapped into it in a car that's like 60, 70 grand, like Cayman GTS money. ludicrous, really. We'll touch on the gearbox. It was either 6-speed manual or the 5-speed Tiptronic S, such as here. Manuals are rarer. There's definitely a gap developing ever more so in the market between manual and Tiptronic versions of 997.1. Manual 997.1 turbos are really hard to find, actually, particularly ones in good condition, as Henry was just confirming there. But to be honest, the Tiptronic box suits the turbo so well. It's not as up-to-date and clinical as PDK, but it's by no means archaic. It's quite quiet, the 997 turbo. That's, I think, something that can be improved on. But it really is slingshot acceleration that I find highly comical, but definitely endearing. There's a noticeable uptick in build quality over the 996 turbo, for example. It's nice, it's opulent, and again points to the fantastic value these cars represent for the money. So the 997 turbo dynamically, as I've said previously, is a fantastic place to be. Give you loads and loads of performance on tap when you want it, but in the meantime it's just super comfortable. A really good mile muncher. Now the big win with the 997 turbo, again I've touched on it in that buyer's guide video, is just how dynamically superior this is compared to a 996. At the front of the car, the nose just has a better tendency to tuck in more. It's just far more direct than the 996 turbo, which again, in feeding into its sports car credentials, really is a positive evolution. There's lots to like about this car. I think the idea of melding the best of both worlds together might be slightly strong in this day and age, because when we're referring to the PCM3, although it is better and updated over the one that preceded it, it's still outdated, is the reality. But the way it presents, I think, is nicer. What I think is more pertinent from a provenance point of view is the fact that this car is the last evolution of the Metzger engine. I think that's probably more what you would hang your hat on with this car these days, but I mean otherwise there's just so much to love about it. Yes, it has Tiptronic and not PDK. Some may find that a bit of a disadvantage, but again I think Tiptronic actually really suits this car and the torque it delivers. You do have the steering wheel mounted gear shifters. I've covered the Tiptronic gearbox in great detail, by the way. I'll pop a link here so you can deep dive into it if you like, because the Tiptronic gearbox I think gets a bad rap and I don't think it is entirely deserved. In terms of everything else, it's just a brilliant performance package. It's a lovely place to be. There's a clear uptick in quality over 996s, for example. You've got the variable turbine geometry, which probably just harmonises the Jekyll and Hyde nature that 911 turbos had prior to this. Active aerodynamics with their hydraulically activated wing at the back. It's all modern day technology, or technology that's still used in the modern day. Fitted together in a 911 carcass that, again, by modern standards, is just tiny.
The 997 gives you a hefty 911 turbo package for what is 718 GTS money. Nab yourself a Gen 1.5 and you'll have the added appeal of a rare find, boasting the final and most technically advanced version of the blown Metzger engine. A pretty good way to kick off our half-century celebrations of the mighty 911 Turbo.